What's up everybody, welcome to my channel. Today I want to do a little quick tutorial to show you how you can make Doom style pickups. So I wore my Doom shirt for the occasion. So we're gonna make these little orbs spawn that will float towards the player when you get close to them. So for people that haven't played any of the recent Doom games, let me show you what it looks like. So I've got a little example project over here. So we can make these orbs spawn when we kill an enemy, for example, and when we get close to them, they will float towards the player. And if you don't pick them up in time, they will simply disappear. So that's what we're gonna do today. And I'm also going to show you a little clip how it looks in a little bit more of a game project, and then we're gonna get started. So first of all, let's create the project. I'm doing this in Unreal Engine 5.5, but this should work in any version of Unreal, to be honest. And I'm going to use a first person template to start with, so create a first person project. We're going to add starter content, and then let's call this something like Doom Pickups. Let's create the project. There we go. So we have a blank new project over here, and first of all let's create a new folder where we're going to add all of this stuff. So I'm going to call this pickups, and inside of the folder the first thing I'm going to do is create a new interface, because we want to use an interface to activate the pickups and also to make sure that we can pick them up. So let's right click, go to blueprint, and then create a blueprint interface. I'm going to call this BPI pickups and open it up. The first function that we're going to add in here is called activate pickup. And for this one, we want to give it one input, and that's going to be the player, but we're simply going to pass that on as an actor. So make it an actor reference, the normal actor, nothing special, and then compile and save it. So we have our interface in place, so we can use it in a little bit. Now let's start making the actual pickups. I'm going to use a parent and child blueprint setup, so we can make different types of pickups using the same behavior. So let's right click, go to blueprint class and create a new actor. I'm going to call this my BP pickup base. So this is the parent blueprint. Let's open it up, and the first thing we're going to do is set up a few components in here. So let me grab my example to make sure I don't miss anything. The first thing we want to add is a sphere component. That's a sphere collision component. So the collision, and let's call this sphere collision. Oh, okay, let's just call it sphere, that's fine. We want to set this up with a little smaller radius. So I'm going to make the radius of 8. And then we need to set up a little bit of collision for the sphere, and we also want to enable physics. So let's go to the right side in the details panel, and let's see, we want to enable simulate physics over here. I'm going to set the linear damping to 1, and you can play around with this number. So this will make sure the pickups don't bounce around too much, but if you like them bouncing around, you can lower this number. And then we want to scroll down a little bit more to the presets over here, and for this I'm going to say block all dynamic, and after that I'm going to set it to custom so we can customize this. And then we want to say over here we're going to ignore the traces, and we're going to overlap the pawn instance, and that should be fine, so we can keep everything else at block. Then we're going to add a second component, and that's going to be a static mesh. So we want to attach that to the sphere, and I made the sphere the actual root of the actor by dragging it on top of the default scene root. So the actual root is gone, and this will make sure that the collision for this sphere behaves properly. So we have a static mesh component, and we're not actually gonna set anything here except for the collision preset. So again, select it in the details panel, we're gonna make this have no collision. And everything else we're gonna define in the parent blueprints, the child blueprints. This is the parent. So this should be good, and then we're going to select the sphere, and we also want to add a point light. So let's add a little point light in here. And for that we could do a little bit of setup. So with the point light selected, I'm going to make the intensity a little bit lower, set it to 2000. And then the radius, we want to lower that as well. So I'm going to give it a radius of 20 units. And that should actually be fine. So again, the rest we're going to define in the child blueprints. So let's compile and save this part. And then we want to do some setup in the event graph. So let's dive into the graph. And we're going to start with begin play. So let's get rid of tick and begin overlap. And for begin play, the first thing we want to do is add an impulse to the sphere. So when we spawn this actor, this pickup, it will have an impulse and it will float into the air and bounce around a little bit. So let's drag off here and add an impulse. Let's plug it in, and then we're going to split the struct pin over here. And we're going to give it some random impulses. So I'm going to do a random integer in range. Over here. And for the X and the Y, I'm going to say 0 to 36 or 35. That shouldn't make too much of a difference, to be honest. And then I'm going to multiply. So multiply by 10. So this is simply to have a bit more difference between of the steps that it can choose. So if I would simply say 0 to 350, then it would pick a lot of numbers that are really close to each other. And if I multiply it by 10, then it will increment in steps of 10. So there's a little bit more difference. Then we're going to plug this into the X value. We're going to copy this and paste it and do the same thing for the Y value. And for the Z value, I'm going to give it a bit more of a impulse. So let's copy and paste it again. And I'm going to say 50 to 100. And again, multiply it by 10 and then plug that one into Z impulse. So we want to enable the velocity change over here. And then this should be good. Then we're going to add a little delay in here, and I'm going to set this to 1 second, but you can play around with it. So this is the delay that will make sure that we can't pick it up immediately when we spawn it. First of all, it has to float a little bit and fall to the ground. And after 1 second, it can be activated by the player. So if you want to make this shorter or longer, you can definitely do that. But I'm going to set it to 1 second. Then I'm going to create a boolean and call this can be picked up. And we're going to drag it in and enable it. So from this point on, we can pick up this actual pickup. And then I'm going to add a second delay. And after this delay, the pickup will be destroyed if it wasn't enabled by the player. So I'm going to make this a 5-second delay. And again, you can change this to whatever number you like. If you want the pickups to stay longer, you can increase it or decrease it if you want to delete them faster. So I'm going to create a second boolean and call this is being picked up. And let's add a branch in here, plug it in, plug in our new boolean. And if this bool is false, we're going to destroy the pickup. So this will prevent that the pickup will be destroyed when the player is picking it up and it's floating into the air towards the player and the countdown finishes. Then we don't want to delete the actual pickup. So as soon as we activated it, it can't be deleted anymore and the player will actually pick it up no matter what. So this is our begin play event. And at this point we want to add our interface. So let's go to the class settings and we're going to implement the interface that we just created. So that's our BPI pickups. And then we can add our activate pickup event. So double click it over here and it will be added to the graph. So the first thing we want to do if we call this event is check if we are not already picking this up. So we're going to add a branch and plug in our is being picked up boolean. If this is false, we're going to set it to true, like so. So we can only pick it up and activate it once. And then we're going to add a second branch in here. and we're going to check if our can be picked up boolean is actually true. And if this is false, we want to wait a little bit. So I'm going to add a delay in here, plug it into the false pin. The completed pin goes back in the branch, and then I'm going to lower the delay to 0.1 second. So this will simply keep looping until the can be picked up boolean over here is set to true, and then this event will continue. At this point, we want to stop simulating physics. So we're going to drag in our sphere and we're going to say set simulate physics. And we want to make this false. Plug this one into the true pin. Then we want to set a reference to our player. So this is simply an actor, but we called it player. So let's promote it to a variable. That's the player, that's fine. And let's plug it in at the end over here. Like so. And then we're going to use a little timeline to make this pickup float towards the player. So let's right click and add a timeline. And we can call this something like pickup timeline, but it doesn't really matter, to be honest. So if we double click this, we can add a flow track. So we're going to go to add track and then add a flow track. If we right click over here, we're going to add a key to the curve float, and with the key selected, we can put it in the correct position. So I'm going to put this at time 0 and then value 0. And then I'm going to right click again and add a second key. And I'm going to put this one at time 0.75 seconds and then value 1. So this is how long it will take for the pickup to fly towards the player. So again, for the time, you can play around with it. You can make this shorter if you want the pickup to flow towards the player faster. And you can make it a higher number for the time if you want the pickup to float slower towards the player. You do want to make sure that the second value at the end is always 1. And then for the length of the timeline, we're going to match the time of the last keyframe in here. So in my case, I'm going to say 0.75. So this is where the timeline will actually end. So that's all we need for the timeline. And then over here, we can plug this into the play from start. And then we're going to use this flow track over here. So that's the number that goes from 0 to 1 to make a lerp towards the player. So we're going to right click and get an actor location. First of all, we want to get our own actor location of the pickup. Then we're going to copy and paste this. And we also want to get the player's actor location. So we're going to plug that one into the second one. Drag over here and we're going to lerp a vector. So the B pin is the player location, and then for the alpha we can plug in the flow track over here. And then the last thing we need to do is grab the update pin of our timeline. So this is kind of like event tick from the timeline. Every tick that the timeline makes, this number will change, and this will make sure that we lerp towards our player location. So we can simply say set actor location. And we want to set the actor location of ourselves, the pickup, and we want to plug in the new location over here. So that's really all we need to do to make this pickup work. So this is going to be our entire event graph, to be honest. So now we want to make our pickups look a little bit nice and glowy. And to do that, we need a material. So I'm going to grab my example material in here because I'm not the best at making materials. So otherwise I probably forget something. So let's right click, create a new material, and I'm going to call this material glow sphere. And it's pretty simple, but as I mentioned, I'm not too good with this, so I need my example in here. First of all, let's select this node, and we want to make sure that our material domain is surface. Then we're going to set the blend mode to additive, and the shading model is going to be unlit. Then we want to scroll down a whole bunch, and over here we're going to set the used with mesh sprites. So over here, and we want to enable that. Then let's dive into the graph over here. We're going to use a Fresnel function. So let's right click and look for Fresnel function, and let's select this one. In here, we want to say invert Fresnel. We're going to drag off here and we're going to look for a static bool. So the first one over here, and we simply want to enable this. Then I'm going to hold the 1 key on my keyboard and click so we can get a simple value. And for this value, I'm going to say 8, and you can play around with this a little bit. We're going to plug this into the power. So this will make it kind of like fade to the edges. But as soon as we have an example in here, you can play around with the numbers and see what they do. So for the result of here, we're going to drag and we're going to add a depth fade. So look for depth fade and add that over here. For the fade distance, again, I'm going to hold the 1 key on my keyboard and then click so we get a value over here. And I'm going to set this to a default value of 100 and plug it into the fade distance. Then we want to give this some color. So I'm going to add a vector parameter. This one, add it over here, and let's call this parameter the color. So for the default value, I'm going to make it white. So make sure you put the alpha to 1, and then I'm just going to make it a simple white color. We want to drag off the alpha channel over, multiply it, and then we're going to multiply it with our depth fade node. The result of this goes into our opacity channel, and then we're going to grab the color over here and plug that into the emissive color. And then you will see this kind of fading orb over here. So as I mentioned, you can play around with these values to change things up a little bit. So if you make it this a higher number, it will fade with more power at the edges. And you can play around with the depth fade as well. So this will make it a little bit more of a solid color and a little less transparent. But I'm going to keep this one at 8 and this one at 100. So let's save this material and let's get rid of it. And then we can create material instances that we are going to use for the actual pickups. So in this example, I'm going to add 3 different pickups, one for health, one for armor, and one for points. And each one of those will have a different color. So let's right click our material and we're going to create a material instance over here. And let's call the first one Glowsphere Green. Open it up. And then for the vector parameter, we can expand this, enable the color parameter, and simply make this a green color. And hit OK. So now we have our green material in place, and I'm going to make one that's gold, and I'm going to make one that's blue. So I'm going to duplicate this material instance and call this Glowsphere Gold. Open it up and simply change the color. Something like that. And let's save the color for later. And then I'm going to duplicate it again and make this our Glowsphere Blue. Open it up and again simply change the color to a blue color, like so. So we have our materials in place as well. Then at this point, let's create the actual child blueprints from our pickup base. So let's right click on the pickup base and we're going to create a child blueprint class. So the first one I'm going to call pickup health. Open it up. And then we want to set up the components. So let's go to the sphere, the static mesh component, and in here we're going to add the sphere mesh. So simply look for sphere, and then we want to use the shape sphere over here that comes with the starter content. So let's select it, and it's pretty big, so I'm going to scale it down to 0.3 on all the axes. You could even do let's keep it 0.3. So now it's not centered with our collision sphere, so that will look a bit weird. So I'm gonna recenter it and set the Z location to -14. So that should be pretty okay. Over here we don't have a material, but if we select another component and then go back, all of a sudden we have the material slot in here. So we're going to select our glow sphere green for this pickup because it's the health pickup. And then we're also going to select the point light and give this a green color, like so. And that's pretty much all we want to do at this point. So I'm going to compile and save it, and then simply duplicate this health pickup. And this will be my armor pickup, for example. And this is just to show you how you can set it up. So you can do this for all types of stuff, and obviously you can also change the mesh into an actual mesh of ammo or a clip or a bullet or something like that to make it look a little bit nicer. So this is our armor, so I'm going to make this a blue color for the light, and then select the static mesh and give that the blue glow over here. And because we duplicated the child blueprint, we don't need to worry about setting up these details again. So let's compile and save and make the third and last pickup, and let's call this points. Open it up, and for the points I'm gonna give it the gold color. So select the light, give it a gold or orange color, and then the static mesh assign the gold material over here. Compile and save. So that's good to go. We have 3 different pickups that we can play around with, and we can make this look a little bit less messy by creating a few folders. So let's create a blueprints folder, and I'm going to put all the pickups in there. And let's create a material folder. I'm going to put all the materials in there. There we go. And we could also create an interfaces folder for completion's sake and move the interface in there. So that cleans things up a little bit. So at this point, let me see, we want to make these pickups spawn, and obviously we don't have any enemies in this project or something like that. So I'm simply going to use the first person projectile for that. So let's go to the first person blueprints folder, open up the first person projectile. And over here where it hits, we're going to get rid of all of this stuff, so it won't bounce around and spawn an endless amount of pickups. We simply want to have one impact, then we're going to destroy this projectile and spawn pickups. So let me grab my example quickly. And that's on my other monitor. So let's add a little variable in here and call this pickup amount. And give this an integer. So over here we want to set the pickup amount. So event hit, we're going to plug it in, and we're going to give this a random integer in range again. So simply to spawn a different amount of pickups each time. So I'm going to say in between 3 and 8 pickups. Play around with it, it's not too special. Then over here we're going to add a for loop. So the normal for loop. The last index is going to be the pickup amount. The first index is going to be 0. And then we simply want to spawn a few random pickups. So let's drag off here and do spawn actor from class. For the class we can drag off and we can select a random array item. This one. Then we're going to drag off the array and make an array. And in here we want to add 3 different entries, and we're simply going to select our pickup health, points and armor. So let's assign health, then for the second one assign points, and for the last one assign armor. So this is something that you would normally do when you kill an enemy, for example, but as I mentioned, we don't have enemies or things like that, so this is just a little example of how you can actually spawn the pickups. And then if this for loop is completed, we're going to hook it back into the destroy actor node, so that will destroy the first person projectile. Oh yeah, we need to give it a spawn transform, so let's right click the spawn transform, split the struct bin. And then for the spawn location, we're simply going to get the actor location of the first person projectile. So get actor location and plug that in over here. And that should get rid of the error. So that's good to go. So at this point we can see if the pickups actually spawn. So let's hit our play button and let's see what happens. So I'm going to grab up the rifle, and if we shoot a wall or anything like that, the pickups will spawn, and you should see a few different colors. So they will appear random. We can't pick them up yet, but they should disappear after 5 seconds. So that's working. That's good to go. We have a nice start. Now we want to make sure that we can actually pick them up. And for that, I'm going to use a component that we can add to our player character. So we don't have to put everything inside of the actual event graph of the player character, but we can keep it in a separate component. So again, I'm going to grab my example to make sure I don't mess anything up. So back in the blueprints folder over here, we're going to create a new blueprint class. And in this case, we're going to create an actor component. And let's call this our BP pickup component. Open it up. And we only want to use event begin play in here. The first thing we want to do is get a reference to the player, but we're simply going to store that as an actor. So we're not going to cast to a first person character or a third person character or anything like that. We don't need that. We simply want the actor reference. So we're going to right click in an empty spot and then get the owner of this component. This will return the actor. We're going to drag off, promote to variable, and let's call this simply the owner. Plug that in, and you could say owning player or something like that if you want to specify it a little bit more. Over here, we're going to drag off and cast to a character. So again, we don't need to cast to a first person character or any specific class. We simply want to cast to the base character C++ class. And this will have a capsule component by default, and we can use that. So we're going to drag off the character and get the capsule component. So the actual component all the way at the bottom over here. And for the capsule component, we want to bind an event to begin overlap. So we're going to drag off and do bind event and then begin overlap. So bind event to on component begin overlap. Plug that in over here. Then we can drag off the event pin and we can create a custom event. So let's call this our capsule begin overlap. So this event will simply fire if our capsule component overlaps something, and we want to use this to make sure that if our pickup overlaps the player capsule, we're going to actually pick it up. So at this point, we're going to drag off our other actor, and that will be the pickup that is overlapped. And we're going to say does implement interface over here, and we want to check if the actor that we overlapped implements our pickups interface. So if this is true, then it's actually a pickup. So we're going to plug in a branch over here and plug in the condition. So a little bit later, we want to call an interface event over here that will make the pickup actually do things to the player like add health or something like that. But I'm going to wait a little bit to do that because we haven't created that interface yet. First of all, let's finish begin play over here. So we're going to go back to begin play. We want to grab the character reference from the cast over here. We're going to drag off and we're going to add a component by class. Nope. Plug it in. And the component that we want to add is a sphere collision component. So for class, select sphere collision. This one, we don't want to attach it manually, so we're going to leave it to auto attachment, and that will simply attach it to the center of our capsule component, so that's fine. Then we're going to drag off the return value over here, and we want to set the sphere radius. So set radius, and I'm going to make this a radius of 500. So this is how close the player needs to be to the actual pickup when it starts floating towards the player. So again, you can increase or decrease this radius to the liking, or you can make it a skill for a player to get a bigger radius so the pickups will start floating towards the player from a greater distance. So you could make this a variable as well and then play around with it during gameplay. But for now, I'm simply going to set it to 500. Then for the sphere collision that we created, we want to set up some collision. So I'm going to drag off here and I'm going to say set collision response. So I'm simply going to look for set response. And I want to set the collision response to all channels first. So select the all channels one. And I'm going to say ignore all the channels. And then I'm going to drag off the sphere collision again and set response. So, response. And this time I want to set the response to a single channel. And in this case, we want to grab our world dynamic channel and we're going to say overlap. So if we look at the pickup that we created, our sphere collision for the pickup is an object type world dynamic. So we only want to make a response to the world dynamic to make sure this is a little bit more optimized. We don't need to overlap any of the other channels. So that's why we're ignoring everything else first and then set world dynamic to overlap. So that's good to go. And then the last thing we want to do is drag off the sphere collision again. And again, we're going to bind an event to begin overlap. So begin overlap, bind event to component begin overlap, plug it in, and we're going to do the same thing for the event, drag off and create a custom event. And let's call this our sphere begin overlap. And in here, we want to activate the pickup so it starts floating towards the player. So again, first of all, we're going to drag off the overlapped actor, and that's the pickup. And we're going to check if it implements the interface. So does implement interface, and select our BPI pickup interface over here. Grab a branch and plug it in as the condition. And if this is true, we want to grab the actor again, and we're going to call our interface event activate pickup. Plug it into true bin. So this will make sure that the event with the timeline that we created on the pickup base will be activated and the pickup will start floating towards the player. So let's compile and save this part. And that should make it work. Now, as I mentioned, we want to add an interface to our player character as well. So we can add health or armor or points to the player. So let's go back to our interfaces folder, right click, go to blueprint and create a second blueprint interface. Call this BPI player, for example, or whatever you want to call it. Open it up, and in here I'm going to add 3 functions. So pick up health. Then the second one is pick up armor. Okay. And the last one is pick up points. Compile and save. And then we can go back to the actual blueprints folder. And now we want to say, let me see. We need to create a second, so let's go back to the interface folder. We need to create a second function in the actual pickups interface. So let's add a new function in here as well and call this item picked up. Compile and save. So I forgot this step, that was my bad. So with this item picked up function, we can go into the component, and that's the actual function that we want to call over here for the capsule begin overlap. So at the start of begin play, the first bind event to component begin overlap for the capsule, we want to drag off the other actor again, and we're gonna say item picked up, and plug that one into the true bin. So that was a little step that I missed in my notes, I'm sorry. And with this item picked up, we can go into the pickups that we created for health, armor, and points. So let's go to our child blueprints, open the full blueprint editor. And for the interface, we want to grab our item picked up. And then we actually have a reference to the player because we created that in the parent blueprint. And although it's not on the left side over here, you can actually simply access it in a child blueprint if we type get player and go all the way down. The variable is actually here. And you can also go to the little wheel over here, show inherited variables, and then it will show up over here with a whole bunch of other variables that we don't need. So I'm simply going to disable that again. So over here we want to say on the player we want to call the interface that we just created. So for example, pickup health. So this is the health pickup. We're going to call our pickup health message. Plug it in, and after that we want to destroy the actor. So we want to destroy the pickup. So this part with the pickup health interface and pickup armor, that's really kind of depending on how you set up your project. If you already have interfaces on your player character in your game project, you can simply use that interface, of course. So this is just as a little example to show you how you could set it up. So let's do the same thing for the armor. In here we're going to add our item picked up event, and then we're going to get the player again. And in this case we want to call pickup armor. And after that we're going to destroy the pickup, so destroy actor. And do the same thing for the points pickup. So let's open that one up as well. Add our item picked up, get the player. And in this case call our pickup points. Plug it in and then destroy the actor. And that's good to go as well. Compile and save. So we don't need our pickups anymore at this point. So now we want to add our player interface. So let's go to our player character, and in this project that's the first person character obviously. So let's open the first person character, go to our class settings, and in here we're going to add our interface, the player interface in this case. And then we can add the 3 events, so pickup health, pickup armor, and pickup points. And because we don't actually have any health, armor, or points in this project, I'm simply going to print a string that says health picked up. And then let's give this a green color. And do the same thing for the armor and the points. So again, if you already have a project where you have health and things added, you probably have your own way of adding health to the player or adding points or whatever you want to do. So at this point you want to implement it in your own project in the way that suits your project. So let's do armor and then points picked up for the last one. And give that a gold color. So everything matches, and we can actually see if we picked something up. So that's all we're going to do in the first person character. Let's see, what do we have left? We already added the item picked up in our component. Obviously we want to add the actual component to the first person character. So over here on the components list we're going to add up our pickup component, select it, and that should make everything work. So right now if we hit play, let's see if I didn't forget anything. We're gonna fire the weapon, the pickups will spawn. If we get close to them they will float towards us, but they're not printing anything. I think I know, I didn't plug in the actual player into the pickup base, I think. Let me see. So we have the player reference over here, and we want to add that in the pickup component. So this is where I messed up. In the pickup component, the last bind event begin overlap for the sphere, so not for the capsule component but for the sphere. Where we call our activate pickup event, we need to plug in a reference to the player, so that's the owner of this component. So we can simply plug in the owner over here, and that should also get rid of all of the errors. So let's compile and save and then test again. And now if we get close to them, they will actually float towards us, and the prints will also show up that we actually pick them up. So that seems to be working. There we go. And then, as I mentioned, we have the delay of 1 second before we can pick them up. So if we are close to the pickups, first they will spawn a little bit and then start floating. And we also have the delay of 5 seconds before they get deleted. So those are things you can play around with. And then the length of the timeline that we added is the actual speed with the pickups floating towards the players. So if you want to make them float faster or slower, you can decrease or increase the timeline speed. So that's really all that I got for you guys today. Hope you enjoyed the video and like the actual pickup system. If you did, please consider leaving a like, and if you want to get some free project files, you can dive into my Discord and download all of the stuff. I will probably also upload this project so you can check out the code and compare it to your own project if you have any problems. Thanks for watching. Talk to you later. Bye bye.